Hello and welcome to episode 9 of Area Control Bros, where we talk about area control games mostly.
Mostly.
We're in a
This ti-
mostly episode.
yeah, this is I don't know if I'd even categorize these games as area control games mostly, though. They're less area control than most of what we talk about.
You
But
Yeah,
know, I
yeah.
find it confusing that we are now doing this mostly versus that we did the two last episodes and we said Leslie because it's still mostly. I mean, even in those two episodes, we talked like pretty much just about area control games as they related to those topics.
okay, it was just supposed to get a quick laugh. It's always mostly. It's always mostly.
I
Until
think
we d-
it's always mostly.
it's always
Always
mo
mostly.
it's always mostly until we do a boss battler episode.
Mm.
Because I think
Yeah.
we'll talk about Primal at some point, and that will be our first genuine Leslie episode because zero area control.
Yeah,
Um,
good luck not bringing any up. But I do agree. We'll need to talk about Primal. You know,
mm.
that's kind of an interesting one for me.
Anyway, today's episode is going to be about Andromeda's Edge, which is on the tip of everyone's tongues now that the Arcs FOMO and hype has already died out completely. No one's playing Arcs, everybody's playing Andromeda's Edge. And we're going to talk about it as it pertains to Dwellings of Eldervale, of course, which is I'd say Andromeda's Edge is like, I suppose, a retheme, remake, sequel, some
Yeah.
combination of all those.
I mean, Elders Dwellings of Eldervale is like the father of this game. I mean, they share so much DNA. They're brother. I don't know how they're related, but they're family, you know?
Hmm. Agreed.
We played Dwellings a good amount, and we didn't want to talk about it until after we played it. Played Andromeda's Edge a few times, and so we'd be able to sort of talk about both. And
Yeah,
that way,
long
we
anticipated Andromeda's Edge. We've all been super excited about this one.
definitely, yeah, we were both looking forward to it because I think for us, I think Dwellings might have been our favorite kind of mid-level Euro area control hybrid game until we played Dead Reckoning.
Yeah,
And now it competes with Dead Reckoning for that space.
I'd agree.
yeah,
Um, But anyway, I guess we'll just dive right into it. So let's talk about the weights a little bit, I guess. Right now on BGG, Andromeda's Edge is an 8.7 compared to Dwellings is 8.2. Of course, there's a crowdfunding effect here. People just got their copies. We'll see how that evolves over time. But the weights, I think, is a little more information there. So Dwellings is 3.25. Andromeda's Edge is currently voted as a 3.64. So it is a heavier game. That's definitely true. I think we would all agree with that.
yeah.
There are more components, more table space, more mechanics, and more,
But
more, more.
I think so much more that it being I almost feel like the weight rating for dwellings is too high, because 3.64 seems about right to me for Andromeda's Edge, somewhere in that neighborhood. But 3.25 for dwellings, am I crazy? That seems
I think Dwellings is weird, where maybe that weight. You brought up a good point in a previous episode, Blake, where you say that weight gets conflated with other things very often. Like sometimes it's conflated with length or conflated with like how much stuff there is and not purely the mechanical complexity of a game, which I agree should not be the case. In this case, though, I think Dwellings may have a overrated weight because even though yeah, I think I consider it to be like on the lighter end of a mid-weight Euro
yeah,
type game, but it does still have a lot of stuff, a lot of things on the board and on the table,
yeah.
and it may be overwhelming for someone who's new to board games.
You,
Maybe
you
because
gotta you gotta play it once or twice to really figure it out, right? Like when we first played, I think was a game that Ben and I both forgot about, or maybe we all didn't realize there was some in-game scoring that really mattered for the strategy,
yeah,
But we still were able to play the game, and even though we didn't quite understand the scoring that time, I feel like we dived right into it.
I think once you start Dwellings, it flows very easily and very well, and you just have to get over that initial hump. Um, I might agree and say it should be like lower three than 3.25, but again, there is definitely initial hump to get over, especially with endgame scoring, because that is. probably the most complicated part of the game is keeping in mind what is worth investing in during the game because of how much it's going to be worth in the end of the game. But even comparing the two games in endgame scoring, Andromeda's Edge is also more complicated in endgame scoring because I think Dwellings, you're basically like, I'm a fire and darkness guy. And I'm gonna be going
Yeah,
fire and darkness tableau, fire and darkness dwellings. That's me. I'm that guy. And in Andromeda's Edge, you kind of have to have your fingers in every pie for the mid game scoring as well, which does not really exist as a mechanic in dwellings at all, except for
yeah,
building the dwellings. The mid game scoring is a much bigger deal on Andromeda's Edge, and also the resources you have left over at the end of the game, which I don't think that they are scored in dwellings outside of the vault cards. That's also a thing in Andromeda's Edge, and then also the tracks, which are very different from dwellings. That's probably the biggest difference between the two games, period, is that instead of the elemental tracks, you have the like different tech trees kind of.
and maybe you're including this in that, but I would say that the modules you add to your little tableau are probably what I would point out as the biggest difference, you know?
Yes, I'm kind of thinking of that holistically because
Yeah,
they're tied to those tracks. Yeah.
they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure how much I mean I only got to play Andromeda's Edge once. You guys got to play it another time than I did. But I'm not sure how much I enjoy the change of the tableau not scoring you anything. Because that was always what I enjoyed about Dwellings was I did enjoy building out the tableau and having that like score for me at the end. Although the I remember there was even something kind of confusing about that in Dwellings of Eldervale, which was like you did have to have dwellings of that type in order to be able to score your tableau, but it was like
Yeah.
really easy to make that happen if you just
Right.
had like even
You could
one.
score three tableau cards for every one dwelling of that color.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is trivial. Like you're not going to have more than six tableau cards if you have two dwellings. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's just not going to happen in that game, really.
Yeah, it might like prevent you from scoring like some odd color that you didn't happen to get any dwellings of, but you really wanted a particular card from their their shop there. And I don't know. I don't really need that either. I don't really need them to limit my scoring when I'm
I
breaching
think
it, that sort of thing.
I think I like the idea behind that in dwellings though, because I think that the idea there is that you can't be uninteractable. Like you have to be attempting to build dwellings to score.
Mm,
And you must do that. You can't not build dwellings. And that's important because the area control of the game comes in kind of mostly related to the dwellings and dwellings of Eldervale is in the name. Um, where like people can stop you or at least make an effort to start a fight there and kick you out before you can build. Because you have to have a person, worker there in order to build there, which you do in a later action most of the time, except in a recall. And well, even then, I guess the worker's already there and you recall later. So yeah, you always need to have it there for like a turn cycle. And in that turn cycle, people have a chance to respond and do something about it if they think it's important. And if you could just score the same amount of points for tableau cards as you could for dwellings without having to build any dwellings, I feel like it would be solved that you just don't care about dwellings and you just do the thing that nobody can stop you from doing, maybe.
mm.
Or maybe not entirely, but you get what I'm
Yeah, it
saying.
would
Like,
change the strategy. It
yeah,
definitely has an effect on what you need to do.
yeah.
mm,
Yeah, and I'm like I said, I enjoyed doing that in Dwellings of Eldervale because the tableau cards are cool. It's nice to be able to have stuff that does things
Yeah.
when you recall. You know, like I I feel like it's weird. I'm not exactly sure where I need to be investing my like economy in Andromeda's Edge yet. And again, this is just like a first play kind of like bias, but it's kind of like you really have to like have a pl more of a plan in Andromeda's Edge of like rather than just like, oh, I'm going to get these tableau cards, they're going to be good no matter what. You really have to have an idea of like, well, how is this going to get me to score at all? Because they don't do anything for you. Um, like mid they don't do anything for you at the end of the day. Like you,
Mm,
especially if you like I went for a bad strategy of like I had this whole engine that I was able to produce a bunch of resources, and then I just was sitting around thinking, well, what am I going to do with all this? Because I was like, I could spend to buy more Tableau cards that also weren't going to score me and just get me more resources. And then
right,
I didn't invest in the track that like uh made those worth anything. I didn't invest in the track that let me score any of that stuff
right.
that I had in my like in my home. So
Yeah, it seems mandatory to at least get to the one revolt bonus on the commerce track in Andromeda's Edge. Like if you don't do that, you probably just aren't even in contention to like win. Like it's just
Maybe
it's
I could see you being so strong elsewhere, but it's certainly I really like that you're able to score that, you know, and it seems very, very strong. I can't conceive of anything just yet from the couple of plays we've had that would be so good that you just wouldn't invest the time to get that one.
well the thing
yeah.
is like it makes sense to have a few of the commerce modules in your Tableau anyway, just so that you have something to do in that row. And so just in the process of doing that and maybe having a few bumps that you get from other things, it makes more sense to me to have like used those bumps to make sure you get there and then just have all the bumps be in whatever you're specializing in. So I do think that we talked about this in our last play, but the spaceport seems like it's the worst development, which is basically what they're calling dwellings in Andromeda's Edge. But the difference is that the dwellings in Andromeda's Edge are asymmetrical. Each of them provides a different bonus. And the spaceport one, which has to do with commerce, the commerce track, has the weakest card. And we were like, why does it have such a weak card? And I think it is. We had a short discussion about it at the end of the last play, but we basically thought that it was just because the commerce track is so good. Like you got your bump on the
Yeah,
commerce track. What more do you want? You know, like
right. Yeah, its card is basically any two resources for any three other resources, or just any three resources, I should say. And for comparison, there's another one of these development cards that gets you four energy, the red one. There's one that lets you do two repairs, which is very valuable and is a really cool thing they've done here with Andromeda's Edge that certainly adds a lot more like intrigue for me, but also definitely some complexity in the decision making from Dwellings to Andromeda's Edge. This repair mechanic and damage mechanic for the tableau cards. But yeah, I think I lost my train of thought there a little bit.
Yeah, I'll mention I one of the things I like about dwellings, and it's a very tactile thing the first time that you play it, is just putting the roof on your little guy when you make a
Mm,
dwelling. That's always really fun. And they have that in obviously they kept that. They have that in this in Andromeda's Edge, but they also added like other little things to slot into these little buildings that you make, which are the leaders that you have to hoover up. And they are kind of in place of the main tiles usually scoring you extra points when you dwell near them. Um, you know, if you've played Dwellings of Eldervale, uh, it's like it's different. I think that one of the things that Blake said when we were playing is he liked that change because it makes dwelling earlier like more of an incentive because like there's a little bit of it's not as good to dwell super early in dwellings
yeah,
because
losing that worker is brutal, you know?
yeah.
And
And then
there's
like
not usually as much of a payoff. Like it tends to be there's one or two really strong spots early in dwellings because you're going to get 2 points for every um special tile that's near them, and then you also get 2 points for every dwelling that's near them. Well, there's a few of them that might be sandwiched between some of those special tiles, but later in the game there's going to be more dwellings. So a lot of these spaces get more valuable later in the game. Whereas in Andromeda's Edge, everybody puts 1 leader down on each of the base cards, and there's 6 of these star bases or whatever they're called. And so in a 3-player game, each of those is going to have 3 points on it, basically, for if you're building a development next to it. So that's already more than what you're getting in dwellings, and it changes throughout the game as people go to those spots. They can pick up their leaders. But imagine you're in a 5-player game. It's going to be even more valuable to build a development early. 5 points on every one of these spaces. I mean, that could be worth a whole heck of a lot. I don't know quite how it would shake out then.
It's probably one of those mechanics that's designed to keep the game length of a board game similar,
Hmm.
regardless of player count. So by having more leaders, you're accelerating the VP of developments. But that is an interesting point because you're still racing towards the same amount of VP, regardless of player count, like you choose 50, 60, or 70. Um, and so maybe that actually makes developments stronger as a strategy in a higher player count game. Like it's just more
Maybe.
points relative to like the total points you can get in the game. It
Yeah,
isn't,
that
Yeah.
it
that's
isn't,
pretty interesting.
so it might be that the strategy, the optimal strategy in Andromeda's Edge may actually differ depending on player count. But again, we haven't played it enough times to determine that, but
Yeah.
seems like it could be a thing.
My big question, and again, as somebody who's only played it one time, is there's a lot of things in Andromeda's Edge that has added complexity, and this is reflected in the weight of the two games. But I'm still not sure if it's added like depth as well. I'm not sure if the complexity has made the decision space deeper or like more interesting. And I'm interested to see what you guys think about that,
Hmm.
having played it two times. Like, is the complexity that's been added actually like influencing your decisions more, or is there just like these little chits on the board that like now I need to hoover up in order to build a dwelling? Because that was somewhat what how I felt when it was like, okay, well now there's like an extra step for me to have to build a dwelling, is I have to go hoover up some of these little dudes, some of these little pegs.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ben, because that's exactly what's at the tip of my tongue for this discussion, which is the additional weight of Andromeda's Edge a weight that contains substance or a weight that contains just stuff, you know? And I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm kind of on the fence. And I think that there's most of the things that I like that were changed from dwellings, like the event track, um, which is I think just 100% straight up better thing than the way that new tiles came out and things and the way that the acceleration toward the end game in dwellings occurred is inferior to that in Andromeda's Edge. I think that's completely 100% better in Andromeda's Edge. Um, but I think it's a little tougher when you look at some of the other things because I think that I was expecting when I played Andromeda's Edge to be like, oh, well, like, I'm going to sell my copy of Dwellings after I play this. But after having played it a few times, I'm like, I don't know. I like Dwellings still. There's
Yeah.
a, they're different games, genuinely. And I do think, and we were talking about this after the second play, and I was saying like I can play Dwellings with my wife. There's no way I can play Andromeda's Edge with my wife. It's just not happening, and that's like a real thing. I think that I would assume that there are a decent amount of people who backed this game who thought that it would be closer in weight to Dwellings and more of a remix than like a significant increase in heaviness and complexity. And they might be disappointed because they may feel like this game is like more than they wanted. And I'm not saying that's a pro or a con, but I'm just saying that to any listeners or viewers, like just be aware this is a longer game and there's more to this game. There's more to teach. There's more to think about. There's more AP moments. And I think most importantly of any of the mores, there's the more player turn length.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mostly
Especially,
related
yeah.
to the tableau, because in Dwellings of Eldervale, you can only activate your little tableau cards, and again, you don't end up with too many of them throughout the game. And you can only activate them by bringing back one of your workers to one of these tableau cards. Well, in Andromeda's Edge, you've got 4 rows for your little tableau cards, your modules to go on. And you can get quite a few of them. And the thing is, once you bring back a worker to the first spot on that row, you can now use a resource called energy to activate the rest of it. And you can build your tableau in such a way that it generates energy to activate the rest of the tableau. And so if you can kind of figure out this balance, like how much energy do I need? Where am I going to get that energy from? Is it going to be all from the tableau? Is it going to be from, the turns that I'm playing, the workers I'm putting out? Um, but if you can get that balance right, then you might sit there and activate, 15 tableau cards. And then, that every time you're going and you're picking up the resources, and it is a big time sink. It's fun when you're doing it, but yeah, when everybody else is doing it, you're sitting there going, all right, when am I going to get to do my stuff again? And you don't
Yeah.
have that nearly as much in Dwellings.
Yeah.
A
Go
lot of
go
the
ahead.
Tableau stuff is not something that you can just kind of go, okay, well, go get your resources and then I'll take my turn. Because I remember the Tableau that you built, Blake, it was like, oh, well, you're handing out a couple resources to both me and
Handing
Will.
out resources. I was getting action cards, which you can play during that phase, and that a lot of them you might want to. Some of them I was getting the action card that would make you discard up to 3 other cards and draw that many +1. So then I was looking at 4 new action cards during that phase while I'm trying to do all this other stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot, and it can really change how the next turn plays out.
Yeah,
Ideally, you'd be able to just move on.
I think that it feels like a misfire in the design. I am quite confident about this particular criticism. I think that the tableaus should have been designed where it was like you can do your tableau recall, return to base or whatever it's called in this game, um, and just the next person can go. To make it
Yeah,
equivalent to like the Dead Reckoning, like, okay, like you can go, I'll think about what crew member I'm upgrading. Once again, I'm forced to compare everything to Dead Reckoning because it's like the gold standard.
yeah,
But the fact that you can like, yeah, okay, cool. I'll just think about which of these next cards I'm upgrading. Go ahead, take your turn. That's it. I don't need to like go through this whole thing. And believe me, I don't mind engine building. It's fun. But like I feel like there's an engine builder. They added an engine builder to the game. And dwellings, you might have like a very weak engine if you have any engine at all. Like
yeah,
maybe you're turning a hammer into two of something else every time you recall, but it's not going to be maybe a little bit more, but it's not going to be something that takes long. It's not going to be some significant thing. But in as Blake said, your recall in Andromeda's Edge is huge in late game, especially. It could be like taking it might be like 10, 15 times as long as taking like a normal worker placement action turn. Like if the most basic thing you do in Andromeda's Edge is like, I'm putting this guy here and I am like taking this moon, which is the new like it's a resource chit, and maybe you're buying or building or doing whatever, but you just do that action and then that's it. Um, in when you do the recall, it can and will be significantly longer than that. And like I said, I think that they should have designed the tableaus such that it could be like, okay, while you're doing that, I'm gonna get started on my turn, you know?
yeah,
But and we and I brought this up in the play, like it was like how can you like do the stuff that affects us so that we can like get started on like our part? And it was kind of like no, like
Yeah.
you have to do it all before the next person can get started on their turn, and or almost all of it. And like at that point, like maybe even after that, as Blake said, if you got card drawing in your tableau, the cards in Andromeda's
yeah,
Edge are serious. There's some powerful cards, so like you have to look at them. They might drastically change what you do with your turn because there are a lot of cards you can play just during your turn. Some cards you can even play on somebody else's turn, or during combat, and and so on. But there might be something that allows you to get sort of an extra action or some benefit that you do want to play on your turn before the other person starts, which would change their decision making on their turn because the board state has changed. And so
Yeah.
you kind of have to let them resolve the whole recall and everything that they might do after the recall before going.
Yeah. And in dwellings, like you at most are gonna have like maybe five things that you're doing during a recall. Like if you have all of your dudes out and none of them died, or you have that card that lets you like recall people from the graveyard or whatever.
The
Um
underworld.
yeah, the underworld. Some of the tableau cards that you get in that are just like vault and they don't even do anything when you bring a dude back. But like even if you have like a bunch of the tableau cards and you have a big recall, most of them are just like, okay, I'm gonna get a gem and two hammers because I slotted the two hammer thing that I picked in up earlier in that part of the tableau. Or like the parts of the tableau that you are activating are usually like these kind of high impact things. I know there are some chaos cards that are like, okay, roll, and then like on this like roll, you'll take control of a monster, or it'll like respawn a monster if you fail. Um, there's like more moments where it's like I'm actually interested in what you're doing on your recall turn of like if it is something that's going to change the board, it's like something like that where it's like, oh wow, like some weird thing happened. And that is another thing that I miss out of Dwellings of Eldervale was just capturing one of the monsters and putting a hard hat on him, and then now he's your worker. Like I
Mm.
thought that was it's so funny and cool that you can do that. Like I remember that like the first moment that we had like somebody do that, it was like, wait, what does that action card say? Like you just get that guy now? Like,
Mm.
yep,
Well,
he
Ben is our
just
designated Pokemon master for dwelling, so of course he'd have that opinion. He's like, "Oh, there's like a Euro game I gotta play. No, I'm capturing every monster. That's why we're doing it. We gotta
It's
catch them
such a
all."
fun part of the game. I love it.
It is funny when like you get one of the really nasty ones. Like what is it? It's like the Chaos one where like everything that engages in a battle with it is just automatically dies, even if they kill it. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna like worker placement this like huge tentacle monster like in here and just everybody's dead. And it's like, oh, great. That's pretty funny. And then there's like the dragon that's just kind of chill and it's really nice unless you provoke it. There's a little personality there.
Yeah. I wish that in dwellings with that mechanic, they have a little symbol that basically tells you if the particular ability on that monster translates, if you still get it when it's taken control of. And there's some of them that just don't. They just have the dice and are big and they lose like an ability that it feels like they should still be able to have. I didn't love that from dwellings, but kind of a small critique of the whole system. I'm sure they had their reasons for those. But yeah, it's so much fun to take control of those guys, and there's a good number of ways to do it, especially in that what the shadow element or dark
Yeah,
element
whatever
or
it was,
whatever it is.
the dark element.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know if this is like across the board or if we just got the guys that are like dickheads, but the monsters in the Andromeda's Edge, like there was the one that was just like the no fun police vampire, where every time you played an action card, you had to spend an energy or lose a victory point. And generally it was like that guy came out and we were all like, oh, this guy needs to go. He's just like ruining our time. Like can somebody deal with this asshole? Like,
I agree. I think that, I mean, not just the fact that you can't like take control of them, although there are a couple cards in the action card deck that let you like use them to do a one-time worker placement. Like I think I got that card once or
yeah.
twice in our last play. That's kind of cool.
Into an unoccupied base though,
Into
so
an
you're not really
unoccupied base.
starting a fight.
Yeah, that is true. So it would be too powerful a card if you could start a fight with it. So I think it's fine that that's like the way they balanced it. But I do wish there was a way to like maybe even like buy them out as mercenaries, especially because you get so many resources in Andromeda's Edge. Like, pay them a few credits and they go fight somebody. I don't know. But then also, yeah, I think that most of the time the monsters in dwellings are like some of them are like providing a passive benefit. Like I think is it the green one?
Yeah, the green one makes it so that the one space gives you like an extra card when you go to
And
it
then the
rather
dragon
than
gives you
two.
VP, and some of them are dickheads, but like you know about them and kind of like they aren't like global dickheads. Like if the red guy who's just going to mess you up is on the other side of the board and you're doing your nonsense on the other side, that's fine. It doesn't really matter for you. But like the having to pay to use action cards guy is just anywhere like at all, like
Yeah,
he's messing you up. And action cards, the action card economy in Andromeda's Edge is completely different from Dwellings of Eldervale. You're drawing way more cards. You got card drawing in your tableau. You got card drawing from other cards. You got card drawing from, coming from all directions. And like I was playing a card draw faction. Blake was also playing a faction that could draw action cards. And
Every time you lose a fight, you can draw an action card.
every time you lose a fight,
yeah.
you can draw an action card instead of getting a sword resource like in Dwelling. So they're encouraging you to go through this deck. So when they put that guy in the game, they knew everyone would be like, "Oh, well, like we just have to kill this guy." Like it just
Yeah,
has to be done.
and he came back in our game. We beat him down, and then he just like we got the next card that was like, oh yep, this jerk's back. You know?
I guess if they wanted to make sure that players would interact with the Raiders, then they succeeded with that one
Hmm.
because like people will definitely hunt that one down and get rid of it. Although I don't think the benefit is even that good. Like I think blowing that one up was like you draw two action cards. And that's like he's probably drained a couple VP or energy out of you already at that point, and you're getting back kind of just like what you put into and then you also just spend a turn fighting him in some cases unless you're able to manipulate it in such a way that you were doing something you wanted to do anyway while fighting him. Um, so it still feels like you're kind of resource neutral, or maybe you like lost out a little from him being on the
Yeah.
board.
And the other one we had, and again, I don't know if it's we just got the ones that are dickheads or not. Like maybe there are some of the monsters that are like more like the friendly green giant in dwellings. But the UFO just kidnaps a bunch of your leaders that are on the board. And then you just permanently lose one if you're not the one to go and kill him. You know?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, yeah, the
Yeah.
UFO kind of sucks. It's
Yeah.
interesting because it's basically permanently removing one VP at minimum from the players who did not destroy the UFO. And one VP doesn't sound like a lot. But this is a game where, as we've learned in both our plays, every VP matters. These little incidental things that happen add up. I think it was like
To be fair on the UFO and the vampire guy that's sucking your points when you're playing action cards. A counterpoint for this. I've had a few thoughts here where I don't want to rip on this game too hard. Number one is that while I do agree that the tableau takes a long time, I think it takes a long time in the late game, you know?
in
And
early game
and
is okay.
for the early game and even through a lot of the mid game, I don't think that it's that big of a time sink. You might be activating two, three things, and you're not going to be recalling that often, right? But people are making big plays later on, and there's going to be some stuff happening. Um, and then to talk about these two particular raiders that we fought. The vampire one I think is actually a little bit interesting because there are a good split of like factions that really benefit from action cards and factions that don't really have additional ways to draw action cards beyond like the base ways, right? Losing a combat or gaining resources like from progressing on the tracks or whatever. And unless they build it into their tableau, right? And you might have a little bit of that, but the card draw moons are mostly few and far between. So I think it's interesting to push a particular like group of factions towards like really wanting to fight that guy. Um, Not my favorite still, but I think I can understand where they're going on that. And then as
That's
for
fair.
this UFO one, um, in the game that we played, I think all of us had leaders on the board at the end of the game, even one or two. And so to say that it automatically takes away a VP, well, that's assuming that you would have otherwise um, scooped up all of your leaders on the whole board, right? And I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen every game. There's some spots where you might just not go there. Maybe someone built the development there early on, and or I guess I wouldn't really build the development on a spot because it's usually the bases, but
You're right. It's stealing a potential VP. It's not stealing a literal VP. I
it
misspoke.
might
You're
even
right.
give you a VP because maybe you wouldn't have otherwise gone and picked up that leader, right? You get to select where the leaders are being taken off of the board from.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe you even, when he comes out, make your decision based on where someone is trying to build a development and deny them points that way. So there's a little bit of interaction with it. Um, I'm not like terribly impressed with the Raiders though. I do like the big ol' elemental creatures in Dwellings of Eldervale better, but I find the
I
Raiders pretty unoffensive.
Yeah, I'm not like I don't mind them that much. I do think the vampire one just for our factions was like, oh my God, we gotta get rid of this thing. But you're right. Depending on the faction, they might feel differently about it or see it as an opportunity. But I think that just in general, I guess just comparing to dwellings, I think like everybody likes the big things in dwellings. And I think
Yeah,
there's a kind of uprising style element where like when one of the things in dwellings shows up and just kills everybody, everyone's like, yeah. It's just kind of like something funny that happens.
right.
And in the Raiders, I think it's a little more feel. I mean, I don't like to use this term because I am deeply masochistic and I like suffering in board games, but it is kind of more of a feel badsy type thing. We had that
Mm.
damn dragon like win every fight for like
Oh my
half the
God, yeah.
game. That dragon like ruined the entire, colony project of the Andromeda's Edge part
They
of the
gave that boy
galaxy.
targeting. It's
And
crazy.
that dragon came through and just like killed everybody so many times. And even when like people were rolling well, it just kept rolling better. And I had that like automatic six card and I could never use it because the dragon got like double six into five. And it was just like, man, what does it take to kill this thing? And it was just kind of, it's weird because it's like it's lurking in this part. It's funny because it's my fault because I put it over there. But it was like lurking in that part of the board where you like want to put a like a worker down.
Mm.
And you couldn't though, because if you put a worker down over there, the dragon would come kill it, like for sure. And I think that's like a little different from dwellings where I just don't think that kind of thing, I don't remember that kind of thing happening in dwellings
Yeah,
much.
they always are going to come in on the edge of the map, and maybe they're denying one or two spaces at the beginning. And it's not unless they get led on a wild goose chase that they really end up in some key area that is going to hurt you, because the map is being built from the inside out in dwellings,
Yes.
whereas in Andromeda's Edge, they've done this very interesting decision where the map is like laid down like in a particular order where it goes row by row by row, and it works out that the bases are all going to be earlier on in this pattern, and then more and more planets will be tacked on to the end, and so you kind of have like base hub when you play this game. I think that you're going to see that a lot, and so if a guy gets over there, wow, he's really denying a lot of those special actions that you're going to want to take.
And that was the monkey's paw of that action card I used, which is like, oh, cool, I'm gonna forget a free action. But now the dragon's over there, and now it's
Yeah,
everybody's problem, including my problem. So it's like you can use that card and you don't even realize the consequences. And I guess next time I'll know about that. But once he's over there, how do you get him out?
yeah, yeah, it's difficult.
So we mentioned combat earlier, and I want to talk about that a little bit because we've talked about combat on this podcast, I think, in an episode or two ago. Um, and Dwellings of Eldervale, and by extension, Andromeda's Edge, uh, like they passed the test. They passed a lot of the parameters that I look for in a resolution system. It's snappy, and there's also like there's a way for upsets to happen. Um, I really like the way that it handles it because like you have an advantage if you bring more guys and you have more dice, but the advantage isn't complete. You might roll poorly and you might still like not roll a six and then they roll a six and they win. Um, and I guess we should probably describe how the combat works for those that aren't familiar. Um, I don't know if you guys want to take a crack at that. I can just explain it if
Sure.
okay.
You,
So yeah, you have oh, do you want to explain it?
well, I guess it was a sure for either one, but yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Ben.
Okay. So you have a number of dice depending on what dudes you bring. And it's a number of dice between one and six. And once you've determined who has what dice pool, you both roll, and then you just compare the highest number, second highest number, third highest number, and then whoever has the highest like pool wins. So if you have one dice and the other person has six, and you roll a six and they roll no sixes, you win even though you have one dice. But obviously, if you have more dice, you're more likely to roll some of those higher results. And if you have like six dice versus six dice, you might end up where you have two sixes and they have a six and a five. Well, you win, you stop it there. Or you might have a situation where it's like, oh, I rolled like three threes, but that guy rolled two threes into two. Um, and I like the system because it is granular and you can have those upsets, and also more dice is better. Like you end up having an advantage, but it's not like just solved right out the gate. There's still a chance for an upset.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Andromeda's Edge added targeting as well.
Yeah, you can explain targeting if you want.
Sure. Targeting is basically your targeting value. You cannot like keep a die with the number that is equal to your targeting value. So if you have targeting two, any die that is rolled that lands on a one must be re-rolled. So you're kind of like you can't get lower than that number. Targeting two is like all of your dice are two plus, no matter what. And it actually happened to me. There was a battle in our previous game where I had targeting four, and I ended up with like 4 4 4 5, which is like the worst thing that you could have with targeting four,
Or rather, with
almost,
targeting three.
or targeting three. Yeah, excuse me. And it was a little disappointing, but I think it's fine. Targeting, I was a little tentative about it, but I think it's overall good. And I think it's nice that there's another way to sort of manipulate the results in your favor if you're leaning more into that strategy of fighting more. And however, targeting is not nearly as impactful, like not even by miles and miles and miles, as impactful as action cards are. And because the action card economy is so much, you're churning through the deck, everybody just sees more cards and plays more cards, draws more cards. Um, it's more likely in Andromeda's Edge that the result of a battle will be determined by a card that is played, whether that is a card that affects the dice results, a card that changes maybe your targeting value, or something changes something about the battle, gives you more dice before you roll, or in the diplomacy phase of combat, which is new, where before combat even occurs, you might cancel the combat or just leave or call a truce and get victory points equal to the number of ships, or whatever. And
Yeah.
the cards definitely vary a lot in power. It does feel like the card design in this game was kind of like, let's throw like every single type of card that there could be for this type of card, and then that's it. Like there's a card that adds one die, there's a card that adds two die, there's a card that adds targeting. And in diplomacy, there's every type of card that you could conceive of in game design that fits that kind of niche of like, what could you do during the diplomacy phase? And so the cards that you have are generally, for combat at least, for diplomacy especially, they're not necessarily always the card you want.
Mm. Yeah.
Uh, for instance, I had a card that was you play the card during the diplomacy phase of combat, and it doubled the amount of rewards you receive for losing this combat. And so, because diplomacy is before battle preparation, before you see what people play in battle, playing that card is this weird gamble because it's like you play that card and now people are like, oh, well, I don't want him to lose this combat, maybe, because it's like then he'll get double rewards, but maybe they just kill you or maybe you win and don't get the benefit of that. And anyway, it just seems kind of weird to me because basically there is definitely power disparity between cards. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there's a few stinkers in there for sure, and I think they do a pretty good job of minimizing the variance there by just giving you so many cards. You're going to see some good ones, you're going to see some bad ones. You're probably not going to have a game where one person sees all of the good ones and one person sees all of the bad ones. But there are a few in there where you're like, I don't really get this. And I gotta say, with how many phases of combat there are, and it mattering like when certain cards can only be played during certain phases of combat. The diplomacy cards are one example of that, but there are other action cards that'll say like, play during battle preparation, and that's a specific phase there. So I think if you've never played like a card game before, this actually might be, a lot of weight here in this game. Just that you have to like sit and ask like, okay, does anybody have a diplomacy card? Okay, we need to do it in a particular order. We need to do it in turn order because it matters. It matters who plays them first, you
Yeah,
know?
it's like resolving like an MTG stack. You have to like
Yes.
wait for priority to go around the table and then come back to you. It's like, does anybody have a diplomacy card? Okay, I'm playing a card. No, I'm playing a card. Okay, well,
Right.
and if neither of those diplomacy cards have canceled combat entirely, in which case it's done, um, then it's battle preparations. Now everybody has a chance to play battle preparation cards and pay energy to get more dice if they choose to, and anything related to that. Then finally you roll. And then after you
Right.
roll, there's also cards that you play after dice have been rolled, which can add dice results. And also there would be any cards that are related to I lost, but actually like I had the paid to lose card. I think Ben had something like that too, where
Mm.
it was like there was some benefit to losing. That would also be
Right.
when those cards are played. And so there are more phases to combat in this game than there are in Twilight Imperium.
Yeah. There's a lot.
That there's a lot. There's a lot. And in Dwellings, comparatively, the combat is literally like, all right, we're fighting. Do you want to add swords to add more dice? No? Okay, let's just roll.
Yeah.
And
You only have to do the whole like who's playing cards now in what order once, and that's after the dice have been rolled, you
yeah,
know?
almost I think all but one card I can think of in Dwellings are cards that like add dice or manipulate the results of the die after you've rolled. There
Right.
is a card that cancels combat. I forget what it's called, but there is like it's like
Mm. Yeah.
might be might be something truce or fairy guide. I don't
There's a good number of those in Andromeda's Edge.
there
I
are
think there's just the one, and yeah.
there is one in Dwellings, but that is a special case. But in the fact that Andromeda Edge there's a whole phase and a whole category of card that can only be played in that phase, only if combat is occurring, is quite niche. And if you are playing at a table where maybe the people you're playing with just don't want to fight. Maybe they're not the kind of board gamers who want to get up in each other's grill and just battle over these spots. Maybe those cards are just sitting in your hand forever. It does call into question. I guess it's this game in general feels like it's almost impossible not to fight, even more than in Dwellings, though, because the fact that ships have movement, which I like this change a lot. I like this over the dwelling system of the workers, which is that the hive movement ships can show up to combat
Mm.
within their move range. I
Right.
I actually think
Versus
that's
just having the wizard that could do his teleports, and he couldn't even teleport into
he
combat,
could
right?
teleport into combat. It would just be like
Yeah.
adjacent regions, which again is easier and quicker and more obvious to a new player. But I do like having the option of like investing in like the upgraded ship that can get there
Yeah.
if necessary, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's like there's a lot of complexity added to combat of what in Dwellings was a fairly simple system. And like I said, I'm still not sure that it added a ton of like thinking. It might I feel like it didn't really add like a ton of depth with a lot of this stuff because it's not necessarily like mostly it's just like, do you have it or like do you not? Like it's like, okay, it's diplomacy phase. Do you have a diplomacy card you want to play, or do you not have a diplomacy card that you want to
Right.
play? Um, it adds a little bit of time to what before was kind of a snappy process. Um, and I don't want to like hammer that point too much, but it is something that I thought about a lot while playing the game of like, oh well, this is like a little bit more complex than it was before, and I don't know how much it's really added to the thinking space, I suppose.
Well, I think
Um,
it's also compounded by the point I was making about ship movement because like before, let's say I'm fighting a raider, like I'm fighting the damn vampire, and maybe Ben has a ship with two movement nearby, and Blake's got the ship that you can pay an energy to warp in from anywhere. And they're like, we're getting in on this too. Well, now combat's a lot more complicated, and we got to go through all these steps. And
Yeah.
because of the increased movement of ships, it's more likely that every combat you have to go through the whole rigmarole. And there's not going to be many combats, if any, past a certain point in the game where it's like a quick resolution, like you got to do all the
Right.
stuff.
yeah, and
Yeah, in the late game, it's like I have the card that I want to play in combat. I need to get rid of it because I'm a card drawing faction. I mean,
Yeah, I
there's
got to
so much
play
of
it.
that. I need to be in the combat, and I have the opportunity to, and maybe even I get the bonus for having defeated this raider. Yeah, I'm gonna join every single combat, and then we got to
Mhm.
do it.
yeah. I don't remember in Dwellings, can you join a combat that you're not a part of? I didn't remember that
Yes.
Only
in
only if
Dwellings.
you're adjacent, or of course if
Okay,
you're
you can kind of just like
in that
dogpile
tile.
in. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that really strong faction in Dwellings, which if their warrior enters that way, like from a adjacent, they get to like show up with a five or a six or something.
Mm.
And I forget if it was five or six, but I was that faction's really good. Guaranteed five or guaranteed six is very strong in the Dwellings in Andromeda's Edge combat system.
Yeah. I want to say this. I can understand the general sentiment here of like added complexity, not quite, you know, worth it in terms of the additional intrigue and the additional or really the additional lack of intrigue added and then the additional time added. Um, I like a lot of it. I like the engine building in this. I'm willing to put a little bit more time into the game in order to have that. And I like a lot of the combat stuff. I like having the incentive to go join combats because I have cool cards that I want to play. Um, that all works for me. But there are certainly other parts of this that and when taken as a whole, it just gets really long. I think our game for this, including the setup and teardown, which is a good portion of this, I think our game took like 5 hours last time.
It did.
That's
Yeah.
long.
It
I
is
mean, that's
long.
crazy.
It's
We did
longer
play the
than,
longest game. I will say we did
but
play
as we
opt
pointed
for
out,
the
there's
long,
not
long
much
mode.
difference between 60 and 70 points. It would have, and Blake would have hit 60 points. Like actually, would you have hit it one turn earlier, or did you go right past 60 to 70, like in one
I might
turn?
have gone right past that
I
turn
think
was
you did.
long.
I think you broke from like 50 something into 70 and then like we went into the end game. So I don't think
Might have
it
done.
actually wouldn't have affected the length of that game at all if we had had 60 as our target. 50 would
Yeah.
have changed it a little bit, but I don't think it changes it too much. I think it's just there's a lot of game actions. In fact, I think that the number of turns you take in Andromeda's Edge and Dwellings is actually probably quite similar. You probably take
Hmm.
around the same number of turns. It's just that there's so much more stuff happening in each turn. And there's these cascading things that can happen. Like you start a combat and but before you do combat, you got to do this thing. You're going to buy these two cards from the market. But buying those cards from the market is going to trigger the event. Triggering the event, you have to you have to do the thing that's going to it causes us to score. So we got to put out a new tile. You got to resolve the thing that puts the resources or gives a bonus to people. Do the scoring. Once we do that, we go back to you getting the modules. Did you find the modules you want? Yes. Get the bumps on the tracks. Okay. Move the lozenge for the event track. Now we're going to resolve the combat. And the combat, we're going to go through like the six steps. Then after that,
Yeah.
you might have other stuff going on. So
It
and
can all happen in one turn,
it
all
can all
these
happen in
things.
one turn. And so each turn, and I said at the beginning, I do like the event track. I'm not bringing it up to rag on it. It's just to illustrate the point that like
Right.
one turn can take a while. You
Yeah.
know, like a lot of stuff can end up happening in one turn. And
And this has that same continuous turn structure as dwellings, right? It has this same DNA. And I feel like that structure works a lot better in a game that has really quick turns compared to, well, Andromeda's Edge. Someone might have a long turn where they're resolving the event and they're doing a combat, or maybe they're doing their recall and they're activating 20 modules and as well as triggering the event and all this stuff. And then the next person might say, okay, and I go here and take this moon, and it's on to the next
and then
person.
pass. Yeah, it's like
Right.
Yeah,
And they just
literally
waited,
that is the whole turn.
10, 15 minutes with
We
this
we
other person doing everything. And it's like, oh man, we don't all get to do our exciting things, as frequently as each other in this game. And so,
I mean,
so,
I do
it's
think
kind
if
of a
they
bummer when you wait all that time and then boom, okay, I do my one place, but
yeah, it reminds me of what's the game I'm thinking of? Uh it'll come back to me at some point, maybe after the podcast is over. But it has the same sort of thing where it's like, here's what I'm doing on my turn. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I'm just like, whatever, man. I don't. It's just
yeah.
like when you're doing your like Tableau stuff, and I don't think it's yeah. I'll go. I know I'm repeating myself, but I just really wish they had designed the Tableau like recall stuff to
Yeah.
be like just I'm
When you
doing
were
this,
talking
go
about that
on.
earlier, I was trying to think of a solution, and at first I thought, well, maybe you disallow action card play during the recall phase. And as I was thinking about it, I realized, well, that doesn't even work because there are other things that you can do that can trigger the event track, and then that's a whole thing,
No,
you
it's
know?
just like I don't know how they fix it. The cat's out of
Yeah,
the box. It's
like
just
you could
like
kind of deal with well, what resources are you giving other players? But the fact that you can move the event track, I mean, it's hard to solve. Yeah.
I think most of the issue lies with the card draw, and but more importantly than that is the fact that you can move up tracks on the
Yeah.
blue tiles mostly, and that's what can trigger all the other things that can happen because maybe that triggers the event or
Yeah, I mean, and
uh,
that can even just trigger stuff that usually like you can just resolve on your own. But since it's intermixed with like all this other stuff that involves other players, it can get a little fuzzy. Like you could have like you can move up on the track and then you have to upgrade a ship. And that's another thing you have to do on your Tableau like turn is you have to decide which ship you're upgrading, in addition to also getting some resources and maybe giving somebody a resource or moving up another track and then that triggers the thing like you said, there's often times where I think you are resolving like 20 separate things on your
Yeah.
turn. Like
Yeah.
there's some turns where you are legitimately like you're doing like 20 different steps of like your turn.
just as a quick side thing, I was thinking like I wonder if I would like it more if instead of there being a draft of ship blueprints at the beginning of the game, if all the ship blueprints were in a market, and when you performed a ship upgrade, you could choose from the pool,
Mm.
thereby incentivizing you to upgrade sooner to get like one that you want.
That
Or
could be interesting. The
I,
ship stuff is an area of the game where I really feel like the added complexity did not improve on dwellings. I like in dwellings that you have two sort of unique faction units, and then the other two are like the defaults. I would have loved to have seen in Andromeda's Edge where maybe even printed on your character sheet so that you don't have these weird tiles that you got to keep track of. If you had two faction unique upgrade ships and then like you could still upgrade the other two, but it would be more of a default upgrade. I don't need the variety in the different upgrades. It doesn't do anything for me. Some of them seem more powerful. I don't really want that to be a deciding factor in the game. Just what random cardboard tile I got that I can upgrade my ship into. You
that's
know?
definitely an alternate thing. I agree with that. I'd almost prefer them to have made it more asymmetrical that way, like dwellings, where like if you're the fighty faction, maybe you have a special fighter and you've got a special battleship. If you're like a economy faction,
Yeah.
you got an awesome worker.
I also don't want to have to think a ton about like what type of units you have. If you have one or two unique ones, great, but you end up with kind of four unique ones in this game.
It's too much to track. It's not like I know what ships you have in your tableau. Maybe I know what your unique one does because like we talk about it and be like, oh, you've got that ship that like gets you a free ship. But
Yeah,
like I'm not gonna know off the top of my head like what everybody's ship movement is unless I ask them.
right.
There's just too many things to keep track of in this game. Like, and it's like a bunch of small things that you may not think are important, although they may become important in the heat of the moment. But yeah, I think it would have been better if each faction just had two special ships and the other two were default, or if I was saying like there's just a market for the ships.
Yeah, a
Uh,
market could be
A
interesting.
market could be interesting because it would add depth as well as complexity. Like there's
that's what I
some
mean.
hate
Yeah,
drafting there, or like, oh, I want to get this because so that the other people don't get it. And then you also have naturally more of a reason to know what other people's stuff does. Because you're like,
Hmm,
oh, they got that one, you
right.
know, rather than it being like, oh, cool, you got that, you got okay, what does that thing do now? Oh, okay.
I think that's an
Like,
example of like adding
Yeah,
something that's not going to add a whole lot of overhead because like you can just slap those tiles down somewhere on the board near the industry area and be like, you got a ship upgrade, just
right. You
take one
take
from the
whichever you
pile,
want. Yeah,
and that's
I
it.
kind of like that idea.
That's
I
that
think you could even start with your unique faction one so that you're not tempted to, because I like the idea of getting my faction ship first. And if the market were there and it was like first come, first serve, I might choose to pick a particular upgrade over my faction one first. And then I don't get to do this unique, whatever makes my faction come to life type of ability, you know?
maybe. I guess the only question I'd have about that is that, some factions have like a special basic worker, some factions have a special like battleship or heavy cruiser or whatever it's called.
Right? Like, do you get the bonus one?
And so like if they start with that, that might actually be like a little crazy. Like if they just have that to begin with, and they could just run over people.
Right. It might work if they were all just
If they were just all
the basic
if they were
workers.
all the
Yeah.
basic workers, I think it'd be fine. But or like letting somebody start with a science vessel, they could just go right into the nebula, and I don't know. It,
Maybe they don't get the bonus ship from it then.
I
But
think
it is
yeah,
nice to be able to build it and get the bonus ship at that time. So,
yeah, I
uh,
do agree.
kind of a weird problem, but
Yeah,
a market sounds cool.
either way, I think that that's probably the first thing we house rule is something
yeah,
related to the ships.
yeah.
Yeah.
I do worry that it does add some AP because like especially in a five-player game, you'd have to have like it would be like I'm looking at now 20 different shits and deciding which of them is the best one.
That is the kind
And
of thing where you could just be like, okay, take your turn. I'm just looking at ships.
yeah,
Because typically your dude did it off an action that's like ended your turn. I mean, you're not drawing any cards because of it. You're just like, I'll just look
true.
at these, take your turn. I mean, seems okay.
I could
Yeah,
see it being a draft at the beginning of the game as well, where you automatically have your faction one, and then the rest of them are all
Yeah,
out.
that might be better too, just like an inner style draft. And I mean, anyway, the point is that there are definitely better ways to have handled that. Like
Yeah.
any of these
yeah,
ideas, I think is better.
And there's a lot of areas of this game I think that could have been examined and maybe just asked, well, what's the interesting thing here, right? How do we're making this game so much more complicated. How do we make it more interesting as well? And I think a draft of that component would be a good way to do it. There's other problems here with the battle and all of this. I
I do
still
want
have a
to
lot of fun with it, but it is long.
I do want to say, I just want to be clear. I do agree with you, Blake, about I like that I have an incentive to fight in this game and like use the cool cards, and that the movement lends itself to that. I don't have an issue with that at all. I just had an issue with like how long combat takes. I
Yes.
it's not. I don't mind that it's like, hey, let's get everybody in and just have a battle. Like, hey, I'm ready for that. Let's do it. But it just feels like with how frequent battle is in this game like there's not a whole lot of decision making in battle besides like I'm gonna play this card, which is the reason why I'm in this battle in the first place. So I'm here, I played the card, let's roll, and that's kind of your decision making, like uh it's not like there's a whole lot at stake every time. Sometimes there is, like there was that key battle, Ben and I were fighting over that like that factory world, or
Mm.
sometimes it's like who shot the UFO gets the cards. It can be important to win certain battles, but I don't feel like most of the battles are ones where I'm like really invested in. And despite me not feeling that invested in it, we still have to go through all this stuff. Like some battles are just like, can we just like roll and like whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, especially as the faction I was, where like I was playing a faction where I didn't care if I won or lost battle in particular. I mean, it's still better for me to win because that way my ship isn't blown up. But I was in a position where it was like, yeah, let's just roll. I mean,
Yeah.
I
And there's a good number of so your faction did that by letting you advance on the war track or whatever they call it, whether or not you won. But there are other factions that also kind of, push you further towards not really caring whether you win or lose. The slime guys that I played last time, if their workers go to the graveyard or however they call it, the scrap yard, they instantly get repaired and then can still be used as part of your recall action. They don't go back on the board, but when you recall, and this is one thing they've added that I actually do really like, and I do think um, is interesting in this game is this whole repair mechanic. Um,
I
I
agree.
don't know how you guys feel on that one.
No,
For
I
me,
like
that
it too.
one, the juice is worth the squeeze on the repair mechanic. So basically, your tableau cards, your ships, and your one other thing you can use repairs on are ships that
Fields.
are in the graveyard. They can be moved from the scrapyard over to whatever it's called.
Repair bay, I think it's like
Yeah, the
something like
repair bay. There you go. And then they're able to be recalled and activate your tableau, which is cool. It's one more way to use your repair. And otherwise, maybe you're repairing the shields on your ship so they can fight more. Maybe you're repairing your modules to prevent you from losing points in the end game, as well as activating those modules. You can't use them while they're damaged. And a lot of the modules that you purchase are coming in damaged. And so they use it as a way to distinguish the power level of these modules, which I don't know. It just works for me. It makes an interesting decision. It's a lot to consider, especially when buying modules. There'll be three modules in four different columns, each row of which is priced differently, and each column of which is priced differently. And and then all of them are going to have different power levels, and they might have damage, they might not. So there's a lot to consider in the market. Um, what that's 12 different cards that may or may not be damaged and are going to have all this text on them and have different costs. So kind of impossible to figure out, really. And it can add a lot of AP, but I enjoy that part of the game nonetheless.
I like it
yeah.
too. And as we spoke about, I think the fact that they have damage on the modules means they have a wider design space for like the power level of the modules. Because what it equates to is it's not just that you don't get the modules immediately because you have to repair them before using them, but also that almost inevitably, unless you have like a factory card handy to double repair on the spot, um, an event card might come out before you're able to repair it. And so you are going to be losing out on VP guaranteed by taking the damage module. Like it might not
Hmm.
be significant, but it's a real, you're, you are taking an actual real VP hit for taking the more powerful module, in addition to not being able to use it immediately, possibly. And so there is an interesting decision space there. I agree, Blake. I do like that part. Um, I don't think that that is one of the issues with the game at all. Like I think that's fine. I would keep that if I were
Yeah, I agree.
tweaking things.
I think it adds depth. Like we talk about depth versus complexity. It makes for more interesting decisions. And I do like that about the market in general. And I think it was something we talked about too, over dwellings, where in dwellings you just have the like doors that like so somebody has to buy the door, which is like pretty good. And then you just have the one slot for like all the other different colors. So you don't even
Right.
get to see like a lot of that deck. And you mostly just end up picking the cards not for like the tableau building at all. You just kind of pick it for the color because it's going to score you points at the end. Or maybe you go and pick something up if it's like really good. Um, but otherwise, like there's an interesting thing that sometimes happens in dwellings too, where it's like, oh, I can only afford one of these, and I'm just gonna get rid of the like good one that is fun because I don't want
Right.
anybody else to have it, and I can't afford it.
That happens
So
Yeah.
a lot more in Dwellings because of how much poorer you are in Dwellings compared to Andromeda's Edge. Like it's pretty, I don't, it happens, but it doesn't happen as often in Dwellings that you can even afford to buy two things from the Tableau market when you go to that space.
Right. Definitely rarer. Even though you can still sort of eliminate cards you don't want other people to get in Andromeda's Edge, well, there's 12 options, right? I mean, something else is going to come out. They're going to have plenty of things to choose from. In dwellings, you might look at me and say, "Well, Blake, there's six options. It's half as many, but that's still a good number." You might only want two of them because you're buying based on the color. And so if either of those is no good, then you're kind of screwed. And if one of them is good and someone takes it away, it's like, ah, come on, man. Like finally
Yeah.
a good light element you know tableau card comes out and it gets sniped immediately. It's frustrating.
Hmm.
um,
Well, I think we maybe should sort of wrap things up a little bit, if that's
Yeah,
okay with
okay,
you guys.
sure, yeah.
I
Um,
think so.
We
I'm
should
not
probably do ratings for both, right?
Yeah, I think I have a rating for Dwellings ready, but I will also give a rating for Andromeda's Edge, but it's like a tentative one. Again, I don't want to
Yeah,
like give it like
same.
a and things can change over time. I think Dead Reckoning has gone higher since even the episode that we recorded about Dead Reckoning as I think about it relative to a lot of these other games. Um I think we can give like a Dwellings and Andromeda's Edge tentative rating if you guys want to do
Sure.
it that way.
I've got mine locked in. I had them locked in before we even started the podcast.
Holy moly. Okay, well take it away
Yeah.
then. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay. For me, I give Dwellings an 8. It's not necessarily like my kind of game, I mean, it's more Euro-y than we usually play, but I enjoy it quite well, and it's like one of the good Euro games, I enjoy it. It's got a lot of player interaction and um yeah. And then and again, I've only played it once, so I really can't say. But Andromeda's Edge shares enough DNA in common with Dwellings that it comes in with some of that goodwill. I get, but I do think that the increased complexity doesn't really add a ton, and it kind of just made the game like a little bit longer. So I give it more like a 7. Like I just knock it down a point in my mind. And that might change. I might go lower, or I might find that later on I'm thinking like, oh, well, this is really like a side grade to dwellings, and maybe I bring it up there. I just don't see it at this point going higher than dwellings in my mind. I would still, I think, even after we've played Andromeda's Edge a couple times, I'm not going to be in the space where I'm like, oh, this replaces dwellings for me. I think I still might prefer to play dwellings over this.
Yeah, very respectable ratings there, Ben.
I was waiting for it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. um if I may,
Of course.
I'm gonna give Dwellings of Eldervale an 8.5. A lot of the reasons we've already talked about. I think it's a game that really knows what it is, and it is very good. It does what it does very well. It all flows very nicely. It's simple, it's fun. You can make cool plays. It makes you feel smart. Um, it checks all those boxes for me. And my initial impression of Andromeda's Edge is that it's just about there with it for me. I'd give Andromeda's Edge an 8. Um, I could see it going up and being there with Dwellings. My main frustration with the game is that despite it being as heavy as it is, there is still a lot of room for like just randomness to win you or lose you a game. Which I want to see less and less of that the heavier a game is, and especially the more time that's put into it. I don't want a 5-hour game or certainly not a 10-hour game to be decided based on chance. Um, or as little of that as possible affecting the outcome. And I think that Andromeda's Edge has a little bit of an issue with that, given how long and complex it is.
Respectable. Um, I think I'm kind of going in between you guys a little bit. I had Dwellings as an 8.5 in my mind because for me, them Dwellings and Dead Reckoning are kind of like they're they're fighting to the death over that niche. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Although I think Dead Reckoning is now a little bit higher than Dwellings for me, but Dwellings still an incredibly solid game, and I have only minor complaints with it to begin with. Like maybe and mostly to do with we talked a little bit about it, but maybe the complaint I would have about the game is just that the tableau choices are quite limited. Like you can only really see the top card, and sometimes you don't even want that card. You just buy it for the colors, which feels kind of uninteresting. But the game is very solid, very thematic. I feel like it's more thematic than Andromeda's Edge, really, um, especially with like the big old beasties. Um, and just the game is much quicker. The continuous turn structure flows much better. Andromeda's Edge, I think I'm coming in with a 7.5 right now. Um, so it's a full point lower, but by no means bad. It's good. 7.5 is a very good rating for me, and it's trending upward. I think I'm a little bit just a little bit disappointed. And it's not like a huge disappointment, and it's possible that it's things that just because they're different, I need time to absorb them. And once I have absorbed them, I will no longer dislike them, and it'll rise to also be an 8.5. As I said, these are preliminary ratings. It just from us having played twice and Ben having played once. And so it is quite early, but I do think that when I play Dwellings, when I'm playing the game, I never think to myself like, wow, like this is taking forever, or man, can we hurry this up, or why is this battle taking so long, or like those thoughts never really occur to me. It just doesn't happen, and so that's a real part of the game. And the fact that I'm already thinking about house ruling Andromeda's Edge, at least in the ship draft area, and maybe even something else, we'll see, is maybe it's going to be a fractured sky situation where like I come in at around like a 7 before we house rule it, and then with like a few minor tweaks, the game starts to feel like more to my taste, and it comes up to an 8 or maybe even 8.5. Still early. I almost feel bad for giving it below an 8 at the moment, but that's just kind of where I'm at. And it's obviously the production of the game is excellent and great insert, but even in terms of insert, Dwellings is a little bit better.
Agreed, agreed. Yeah, Dwelling's insert is an all-timer, and Andromeda's Edge had some big shoes to fill, and it did a pretty good job, but it's not quite there, you
Yeah.
know?
Um,
So that's pretty much where I'm at.
okay.
Yeah, fair.
Respectable, even.
Mm,
Respectable. Yeah.
mm, yeah, I'd say
All right.
so.
Well, if that's everything, I think that's going to conclude our podcast for today. Thanks for watching and or listening. See you next time.
See you next time.